A real soldier doesn't buy coffee here.
Take the costume off, little girl, before I do it for you. Officer Kyle Jenkins' sneer cut through the quiet hum of Mama Sue's diner like a whip. Jenkins felt the familiar rush of adrenaline and self-righteousness. He had 17 years on the Fayetteville PD, 17 years were his instincts the same ones telling him this black woman in a crisp army uniform was a fraud had always been right. Jenkins was convinced that his experience, the countless late nights, and the dangerous arrests he'd made gave him an unerring sense of criminal deception. That gut feeling, which he often boasted about at the precinct, was screaming at him that the woman sitting calmly in the booth was disrespecting the sacrifices of real veterans. He leaned in, focusing intensely on the lieutenant's face, his eyes hard and dismissive, ignoring the nervous whispers of his partner, Officer Ben Shaw, and the angry glares of the elderly veterans scattered across the room. He didn't care about their feelings. He cared about the integrity of his jurisdiction, and he certainly wasn't going to let a woman he perceived as a civilian playing dress-up commit stolen valor on his watch. He swaggered over to the booth, planting himself directly in front of the woman, his large shadow blocking the warm morning light. But he had no way of knowing that the woman he was about to cuff and publicly humiliate wasn't just a lieutenant. She was about to report directly to the Pentagon, and one single phone call was all it took to dismantle his entire career. Lieutenant Shonda Hayes was the picture of calm dignity, sitting in her impeccable Army uniform. She wore the rank of lieutenant, and her crisp uniform coat bore the subtle but telling signs of active service, a few ribbons, a campaign badge. She had just finished a full night on post at nearby Fort Bragg and stopped at Mama Sue's, a local institution known for its home-style cooking and strong coffee. The air in the diner, thick with the smell of brewing coffee and baking pecan pie, had been her sanctuary until the squad car tires screeched outside. Shonda had politely tipped Mama Sue 20%, a habit ingrained in her Southern upbringing and respect for service workers before settling down. Jenkins's initial loud comment about kids playing dress-up had startled the few regulars who sat reading the morning paper. Jenkins now stood over her, his hands resting on his belt, radiating aggressive authority. He shouted, demanding she immediately prove she was a real soldier, his voice shaking with contempt. Shonda, showing no sign of fear, reached into her pocket. She calmly took out her official military ID, common access card, and silently slid it across the booth table toward him. Jenkins snatched the ID up, scrutinized the rank and photo, and then, with a contemptuous sneer, slammed the card back down, causing coffee to slosh over the rim of her cup. "This is a fake ID. You don't have the stomach for real combat, little girl," he bellowed, ensuring every patron in the diner could hear the insult. He followed the gendered slur with a racist insinuation, saying she must be looking for a handout, not service. Jenkins continued his tirade, his voice escalating, formally accusing her of impersonating a military officer and threatening federal charges. It was clear the man wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in asserting his power and feeding his own prejudice. The silence that followed Jenkins' accusation was thick and heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic ticking of the diner's old clock and the furious whispers of the patrons. Many of them were older folks, men and women who remembered the sacrifices of earlier wars, and the sight of a decorated uniform being so casually defiled, regardless of who wore it, was a profound offense. Jenkins misinterpreted the silence as submission. His partner, Officer Ben Shaw, shifted uncomfortably on his feet, his gaze fixed firmly on the checkered floor tiles. Shaw was younger, maybe 5 years on the force, and while he rarely challenged Jenkins's aggressive authority, he felt a prickle of genuine unease, the kind that transcended professional caution and touched on basic human decency. He glanced at the wall behind the counter, where Mama Sue proudly displayed framed, sepia-toned photos of her uncles and cousins in military fatigues from the Korean War and Vietnam. The contrast between that honorable legacy and Jenkins' current behavior was jarring. Jenkins stepped closer, pushing the edge of the booth table, clearly enjoying the public spectacle he had created. "Look around, sweetheart," he sneered, his voice now lower but far more menacing. "You think these people believe your little fantasy? You people always try to pull the victim card when you're caught." The racial slur was delivered with a cruel familiarity that made several older veterans in a nearby booth exchange furious glances. One of them, Mr. Walter, a tall black man with a distinguished silver beard and a Marine Corps League pin fastened to his worn denim jacket, slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone, his arthritic fingers fumbling slightly as he activated the camera. This small, silent act was the community's first response to the injustice. Meanwhile, Officer Shaw, unable to meet the eyes of the other patrons, nervously took a small step back. He saw the genuine, unblinking composure in Lieutenant Hayes's dark eyes, and a quiet, uncomfortable voice in his head told him this was wrong. He tried a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head at Jenkins, but the lead officer was too lost in his own power trip to notice. Shonda, Lieutenant Hayes, finally spoke, her voice measured and precise, cutting through Jenkins' noise like a thin blade. "Officer, I have presented my identification. My command is at Fort Bragg, less than 10 miles from this location. You are acting on suspicion alone, which is not probable cause for the accusation of a federal crime. I advise you to contact my installation before you proceed with a false arrest." Her professional tone only seemed to ignite Jenkins' arrogance further. He took Shonda's calm as defiance. "You don't advise me, I advise you," he barked, his face flushing red. "You're clearly not who you say you are. You don't have the bearing. You don't have the uniform rights. And I don't need your installation to tell me the difference between a real soldier and a cheap fraud." This blatant refusal to perform even the most basic check, a simple phone call to the base, was the final, critical step in his descent into pure Lambquian abuse of authority. He reached down, his large hands snapping out to grab Shonda's arm with brutal force, pulling her sharply toward the center aisle. Jenkins' grip was tight and painful, twisting Shonda's arm behind her back. The sudden, aggressive movement caused her water glass to topple over, its contents spreading quickly across the table and dripping onto the floor. The sound of the glass rolling across the tile was the physical manifestation of the shattered morning peace. The elderly Mr. Walter, the Marine veteran, stood up fully now, his phone held steady, filming the entire sequence, his face a mask of quiet fury. Mama Sue, standing rigid behind the counter, whispered a plea. "Officer, please." "She's a good girl." Jenkins ignored them all, intoxicated by the immediate application of his power. He felt justified, triumphant even, in cornering the person his prejudice had labeled a liar. He yanked Shonda's arm higher, eliciting a small, sharp gasp from her, though her face remained unnervingly composed. Jenkins didn't care about the gas, only the finality of the metal cuffs. He reached for his belt, his eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction as he prepared to complete the humiliation. "You're under arrest, ma'am," he spat, emphasizing the condescending address. "Let's see how smart you are in a jail cell." This was the moment of peak outrage and injustice for the patrons witnessing the scene. The sight of a black woman, a presumed soldier, being cuffed by a police officer based on nothing but racist bias. As Jenkins pulled the cold steel cuffs free from their leather holster, Shonda finally spoke again, her voice clear, formal, and utterly devoid of panic, a quality that only intensified Jenkins's rage. Shonda knew that resisting would only validate Jenkins' actions. Her training had taught her that maintaining discipline and invoking the chain of command was her strongest defense against arbitrary power. Jenkins was about to snap the cuff shut on her wrist, but Shonda managed to slightly shift her body, addressing him directly, her eyes locked onto his, demanding attention. She was no longer asking for courtesy, she was issuing a final professional warning that carried the weight of the federal military code. She made one final attempt to appeal to the legal boundary he was about to cross, citing her constitutional rights and the severe penalty for obstructing the duty of a commissioned officer. However, Jenkins had already crossed the emotional line. The legal one meant nothing to him now. His face was set in a hard, determined scowl, eager to close the metal around her wrists. He leaned in, anticipating her last desperate plea, maybe a tearful admission of guilt. He was wrong. As Jenkins twists Shonda's arm and prepares the cuffs, Shonda says, "Sir, you are making a grave mistake. Before you commit a federal offense, I request one phone call, and you will regret who I call." When the metal snapped shut, it wasn't just Shonda's wrists that were restrained. It was the dignity of every person who had ever worn that uniform. The metallic snap was sharp and final, echoing in the diner as loudly as Jenkins shouting. Lieutenant Shonda Hayes felt the cold steel bite into her wrists, a physical assault on her professionalism and her service. The shock of the arrest, done without cause and with such aggressive contempt, registered immediately with every person present, especially the veterans whose respect for the military was deeply personal. This moment transcended a simple legal dispute. It became an outright public defilement of the uniform and the values it represented. As the cuffs tightened, Shonda focused on maintaining her poise, refusing to grant Jenkins the satisfaction of a struggle or a breakdown. Her eyes, fixed forward, showed no sign of fear, only disciplined frustration. She knew that the elderly gentleman, Mr. Walter, was still filming her, and his steady camera was her silent witness. Jenkins, meanwhile, was riding a wave of arrogant triumph. He stepped back, dusting his hands as if he'd just completed a difficult, dangerous operation, when in fact he had simply overpowered an unresisting woman who had presented her military ID. His partner, Officer Ben Shaw, was visibly pale. Shaw nervously adjusted his tie, his gaze jumping between the cuffed lieutenant and the furious, silent faces of the patrons. Shaw had served 5 years on the force, and while he'd seen arrests go sideways, this one felt different. It was an arrest built on spite, not necessity. He had watched Shonda present her common access card, and he knew in his gut that a simple check would clear her. The thought of the paperwork, the potential civil suit, and the departmental review was beginning to weigh heavily on him. He knew Jenkins' instincts were often laced with prejudice, but he'd always managed to stay silent, hoping the storm would pass. This time, however, the silence was harder to maintain. Shaw took a quick, nervous glance at the elderly Mr. Walter, who was still holding his phone up like a small modern shield. He saw the sheer, unblinking anger in the veteran's eyes, and that look spurred him to action. Shaw stepped quickly to the side of Jenkins, pulling at his sleeve. "Kyle," he whispered urgently, his voice low enough so the patrons couldn't hear. "She gave you the ID. We should check the database first. Let's just confirm it, quickly, before we book her. This feels, unnecessary." Jenkins, however, was deaf to reason. He violently yanked his arm free from Shaw's grip, his eyes blazing with fury at the interruption. "Stay out of this, Shaw. I know a faker when I see one. You worry about backup, not my arrest procedure. Traitor Racini." Jenkins shoved Shaw aside, emphasizing his superior rank and experience, crushing the younger officer's attempt at decency and reinforcing Shaw's subordinate role in the abuse of power. With Shaw neutralized, Jenkins focused entirely on the public humiliation of Shonda. He grabbed her cuffed arms roughly and began to drag her toward the entrance of the diner. The path out of Mama Sue's was lined with booths filled with local residents and veterans, forcing Shonda to walk a gauntlet of silent, furious witnesses. Each step was a deliberate act of public shaming, forcing the woman in uniform to feel the weight of his prejudiced authority. As they passed the counter, Mama Sue let out a soft cry of distress, but Jenkins merely paused to give the older woman a hard, warning stare. This blatant disregard for the community's feelings intensified the quiet rage building inside the establishment. Once outside, the crisp November air did nothing to lessen the tension. Jenkins forcefully guided Shonda to the patrol car, leaning her against the side while he retrieved his radio. She stood perfectly still, her back ramrod straight despite the uncomfortable position of her cuffed hands. She noticed the slight dust motes clinging to her perfectly pressed uniform jacket, a small, frustrating detail in the middle of a massive injustice. The passing traffic on the street had already slowed, drawn by the flashing blue and red lights of the patrol car. Several drivers were now pulling out their own phones, joining Mr. Walter's silent documentation of the event. Jenkins turned back, satisfied with the public display. He leaned in close to Shonda, his breath smelling faintly of cheap coffee and entitlement. "You people always try to pull the victim card," he spat, his voice a low, toxic whisper meant only for her ears. Maybe now you'll learn to respect real authority. Go ahead, cry for your mama, little girl. You don't have the stomach for real combat or real consequences. He followed the gendered and racial slur with a cutting remark about her lack of bravery. This was the moment of peak as he verbally stripped her of her pride, her service, and her identity, believing he had completely broken her spirit. Jenkins stood back, satisfied, waiting for her tears or her pleas. He got neither. Shonda's eyes met his, clear and unwavering. Her dignity was unshakable, an internal fortress he could not breach with his petty tyranny. She showed him no fear, only the cold, hard certainty of a commissioned officer who knew her rights and his colossal error. Shonda didn't waste energy on useless arguments or emotional outbursts. The time for pleading had passed. Now it was time for protocol. She cleared her throat, and despite the tightness in her chest, her voice was loud enough to carry over the traffic and firm enough to command the attention of the now smug Officer Jenkins. She formally requested to make her one phone call, citing the specific military protocol that allowed her to contact her superior officer when illegally detained. She made the request under the pretense of military law, a language Jenkins thought he understood but clearly didn't respect. Jenkins mocked her request, leaning back against the hood of the patrol car with a condescending chuckle. To who? Your public defender? You think some hotshot lawyer is going to rush out here for a fake lieutenant? He expected her to admit defeat, to beg for leniency or for a civilian contact. Shonda simply maintained her professional composure, her face a serene mask of military discipline. She took her phone, which was still in her pocket, and used the knuckles of her cuffed hands to navigate the screen. It was an awkward, focused effort, watched by several onlookers who had gathered on the sidewalk. She bypassed the standard contact list and pressed the single speed dial entry she rarely needed, but always kept current. The entry was simply labeled MG Mitchell. The phone rang twice. The sound, muffled by the background noise, was a strange, bureaucratic counterpoint to the street chaos. Jenkins leaned forward, curiosity briefly overriding his arrogance. Shonda answered formally, her voice snapping to attention. This was not a plea. It was a military report. She recited her name, rank, and current location. Sir, Lieutenant Hayes reporting. I have been wrongfully detained by local law enforcement, claiming stolen valor. I am requesting immediate assistance. The brief report ended, and Shonda held the phone to her ear, standing perfectly still. The ensuing silence on the street felt absolute. Then a voice deep, cold, and heavy with authority that transcended the simple rank of a major general came through the phone's speaker, faint but unmistakable. The voice carried the weight of decades of service and utter, non-negotiable command, the kind of authority that Jenkins had only ever seen in movies. A deep, cold voice answers, I see you, Lieutenant. Hold your position. We've traced the GPS to the area. My team is on the way. Do not speak to them again. Jenkins laughed, loud and brittle, pointing at Shonda's phone. Look at the time, little lady. Your lawyer's probably still in bed. You think some fancy suit is going to stop me? This was Officer Jenkins' final arrogant performance, a desperate attempt to maintain control. Jenkins found the idea that a high-ranking military officer would drop everything for a simple lieutenant utterly ridiculous, especially since he was convinced she was lying. He desperately clung to his 17 years of experience, using his authority to dismiss the threat in Shonda's voice. He continued to mock her, leaning in close, his voice thick with condescension. You waste my time with fairy tales. When your major general shows up, I'll be sure to hand him a citation for obstructing an official police arrest. He looked around at the onlookers, seeking validation for his power play, enjoying the final triumphant moments of control. He didn't see the silent disgust on the faces of Mr. Walter and the other patrons, nor the deepening shame on Officer Shaw's pale face. The tension, already thick, reached a breaking point as Jenkins took a firm grip on Shonda's cuffed arm. Unexpectedly, just as he began to drag Lieutenant Hayes toward his patrol car, 3 black SUVs, silent and ominous, turned the corner. Jenkins thought he had cornered a suspect. He had actually just summoned a Major General of the United States Army. The 15 minutes following the phone call had been an eternity of strained silence. Shonda stood rigidly by the car, ignoring Jenkins' sporadic taunts and focusing on the promise of the voice she had just heard, the voice of Major General Mitchell. Her immediate concern wasn't personal freedom, but the integrity of her position and the institution she served, which Jenkins had publicly scorned. Officer Shaw, visibly nervous, kept glancing down the street, perhaps hoping that whatever was coming would be swift. Jenkins, on the other hand, was growing increasingly irritable. He checked his watch twice, making loud theatrical sighs, complaining about the wasted resources this fake call had cost his department. The traffic around Mama Sue's had slowed to a crawl, creating a bizarrely silent audience for the impending confrontation. Jenkins, convinced no one was coming, was about to forcibly put Shonda in the car when the first sign of a genuine change in authority arrived. The three large, black, unmarked SUVs, vehicles clearly not belonging to the local government or the Fort Bragg base, glided silently to a halt directly behind Jenkins' patrol car. The sudden, silent arrival of the black SUVs shattered Jenkins' illusion of control. The vehicles didn't have flashing lights or sirens. They didn't need them. Their appearance alone commanded immediate attention, radiating an authority that was palpably different from the local police power Jenkins wielded. Before Jenkins could react or even order them to move, three figures emerged from the second and third vehicles. They were men and one woman, all dressed in sharp, dark civilian suits, but their posture, their crew cuts, and the subtle earpieces hinted at a military discipline far beyond that of the local police. This was the CID team, Criminal Investigation Division, the advance guard of the Federal Military Police. Their movements were swift, professional, and entirely focused. The CID team members approached Jenkins and Shaw without a word. Jenkins, recovering from his initial shock, immediately puffed out his chest and attempted to reassert dominance. "This is a local police investigation. I need you all to clear the area immediately," he barked, reaching instinctively for his radio. The CID agents completely ignored him. One agent, a woman with an unwavering gaze, simply stepped between Jenkins and the patrol car, a silent, immovable barrier. Another agent, holding a thick military clipboard, moved to Shaw's side, effectively boxing the two officers in. Jenkins' fury flared again. He tried to grab the female agent's arm, demanding to know who they were. But she simply sidestepped him with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to handling resistance. This silent, professional rejection of his authority was more unnerving than any shouting match. Jenkins was used to dominating every room he entered. Here, he was a nuisance being expertly managed. Then the final, most impactful event occurred. The rear door of the lead SUV opened. Major General Ryan Mitchell emerged. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in his two-star uniform, his silver hair cropped short, and his bearing radiating decades of dedicated service. The difference between his appearance in Jenkins' rumpled uniform and aggressive posture was stark. Mitchell was discipline and command personified. He didn't glance at the onlookers or the CID agents. His entire focus was fixed on Jenkins. He walked deliberately, his movement economical, right up to the stunned local officer. This moment served as the climax setup, where the two conflicting forces of the story, prejudice and disciplined authority, met face to face. Jenkins, for the first time since he entered the diner, looked genuinely terrified, the color draining from his face as he finally recognized the weight of the man standing before him. Major General Mitchell stopped directly in front of Officer Jenkins. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone was cold, measured, and absolute, cutting through the Fayetteville morning air with chilling finality. He didn't bother with pleasantries or introductions. He looked directly into Jenkins' eyes, his gaze hard and unforgiving, and delivered the statement that would end the police officer's career. "I am Major General Mitchell. That officer you illegally detained is Lieutenant Shonda Hayes. Your department has been notified. You are now under federal military investigation for gross misconduct and obstruction of justice." The words landed like a physical blow. Jenkins stammered, attempting to justify himself with a pathetic, "Sir, we thought she was..." Mitchell cut him off with a subtle, dismissive hand gesture, signaling that no excuses would be heard. The general's use of the word federal made it clear that this was no longer a local matter. This was the full, unforgiving weight of the United States military responding to an attack on its own. With the confrontation concluded, Mitchell subtly signaled the CID team. The female agent stepped forward, holding the stack of official documents that detailed the immediate termination procedures. She offered the papers to Jenkins, who stood frozen, unable to move. She then turned to the terrified officer Shaw, who accepted the clipboard with shaking hands. Her voice, though quiet, was official and precise. "Hand over your weapon, badge, and radio. You are terminated, effective immediately. Not suspended. Terminated." Jenkins finally found his voice, a desperate, cracking sound. "Wait! This is a mistake! You can't just—" His words trailed off as he realized the insurmountable authority facing him. The CID team waited patiently, hands ready, their presence making it clear that resistance was not an option. This was the moment of ultimate power reversal, the arrogant officer rendered helpless by the very institution he had disrespected. General Mitchell completely ignored Jenkins' desperate pleas. His mission was complete. The offender was neutralized. He finally turned away from the stunned officers and walked toward the patrol car where Shonda stood, cuffed. His expression softened instantly, reflecting warmth and deep respect. He saw the marks the cold steel had already made on her wrists and the disciplined control she had maintained through the entire ordeal. He addressed the CID team, his voice returning to its firm, uncompromising command. But this time, it was an act of honor and protection. He focused solely on his lieutenant, the true victim of the injustice. Mitchell finally turns to Shonda, his eyes warm. He says, "Get those cuffs off my lieutenant, now." The silence in the diner was louder than any siren. It was the sound of a career ending and the abrupt, heavy realization of a profound mistake. Officer Kyle Jenkins stood frozen, the harsh reality of Major General Mitchell's authority sinking in. The word terminated echoed in his mind, shattering 17 years of accrued confidence and prejudice. He could only stare dumbly at the CID agent, clutching the papers that detailed his immediate dismissal. His desperate attempts to argue, to claim procedural error, were met with the general's unwavering, dismissive silence. This was the moment of complete powerlessness, the price exacted by his own arrogance. Meanwhile, the Major General himself turned his back on the defeated officers, his focus entirely on Lieutenant Shonda Hayes. General Mitchell moved with the precise efficiency of a man who valued time and dignity. He stepped close to Shonda, his gaze fixed on the cold steel around her wrists. He took a small key from one of the CID agents and, without speaking, carefully unlocked the handcuffs. The cuffs fell with a small, quiet clatter onto the pavement, a sound of finality and liberation. Mitchell gently rubbed Shonda's wrists, examining the angry red marks left by Jenkins' tight application. He treated her not just as a subordinate officer, but as someone who had just endured a gross personal violation. His voice was low, graveled, and filled with quiet sincerity. "I apologize, Lieutenant," he said, ensuring only Shonda could hear. "This should never have happened under my watch. Your service deserves respect, not this." This quiet, personal act of respect was the true beginning of Shonda's dignity being restored, contrasting starkly with the public humiliation she had just suffered. The CID team, highly trained and efficient, moved to execute the general's order. They approached Jenkins and Shaw, quietly relieving them of their weapons, badges, and portable radios. The process was swift and clinical. Jenkins continued to stammer, his eyes wide and panicked, looking for any loophole, any superior officer to appeal to. He found none. The CID agents handled the confiscated equipment with a formal detachment, treating the once powerful items like mere evidence. Mitchell, standing beside Shonda, offered her a clean handkerchief from his uniform pocket, a small gesture of care and support. The dignity of the military machine had arrived to correct the failure of local law enforcement, demonstrating an immediate and absolute commitment to justice. With their official tools of power stripped away, Jenkins and Shaw were escorted toward the unmarked CID vehicles. This was their walk of shame, but notably, General Mitchell did not order them to be handcuffed, a subtle detail that emphasized honor over petty retribution. They were being removed from the scene swiftly and professionally, avoiding further spectacle. Jenkins, consumed by disbelief, tried one final time, turning back to shout a desperate question at the general. What about my pension? You can't just throw away 17 years. Mitchell didn't even turn around, letting the silence serve as the definitive answer, symbolizing the absolute closure of the matter. Officer Shaw, however, reacted differently. As he walked past Shonda, he kept his head bowed, his badge and gun holster feeling impossibly heavy in the CID agent's hands. He was pale with fear and shame, but in a fleeting moment of honesty, he met Shonda's eyes. He saw the quiet, disciplined hurt there, not triumph. He stopped briefly, pulling the CID agent's hand, and whispered a barely audible, "I'm sorry, Lieutenant." It was a small, broken apology, an acknowledgement of his failure to intervene, which Shonda received with a slight, non-committal nod, neither accepting nor rejecting his contrition. This brief exchange highlighted the subplot of Shaw's internal conflict and his potential for redemption, contrasting sharply with Jenkins' unrepentant rage. As the patrol cars belonging to Jenkins and Shaw remained empty, their authority permanently vacated, the patrons of Mama Sue's diner finally erupted. The silence that had held them hostage burst into loud applause and cheers. People spilled out onto the sidewalk, surrounding Shonda and General Mitchell. The elderly Mr. Walter, tears welling in his eyes, lowered his phone, walked up to Shonda, and gave her a long, heartfelt hug. "Thank you, ma'am," he choked out. "Thank you for showing us what real dignity looks like." Others followed, offering words of apology on behalf of the town and thanking her for her calm, disciplined response. This public reaction provided the immediate emotional and community-based justice that Jenkins had tried to deny her, reinforcing the core value of mutual respect among the military community and its supporters, particularly resonating with the older audience. General Mitchell allowed the applause and expressions of gratitude to continue for a moment, recognizing their importance to Shonda's recovery and the community's healing. He then gently guided Shonda toward his own SUV, shielding her from the increasing number of reporters arriving on the scene. Before she stepped inside, he paused, handing her her official military ID and her personal phone, the two items that had sealed the fate of the two officers. The atmosphere of the moment was heavy with the possibility of legal action and financial retribution, a clear choice laid out before the lieutenant. Mitchell looked at her, his expression serious. His voice was calm, but held the weight of profound expectation. This was not a command, but a philosophical challenge from a superior officer to a trusted subordinate, a lesson in leadership and moral courage. "Lieutenant, what happens next is your decision. You have grounds for a massive civil suit against the city. Retribution is an option, but honor is the only requirement." Mitchell's statement emphasized the theme that Shonda's character and commitment to honor were far more valuable than any financial gain or personal revenge. This challenged Shonda to make a choice that defined the ultimate meaning of this injustice. Shonda looked at the general, then back at the receding black SUVs carrying Jenkins and Shaw, and finally at the cheering citizens of Fayetteville. She nodded slowly, accepting the challenge. The decision would be made later in the quiet sanctuary of her home, far from the crowds. As General Mitchell ushered her into the vehicle, the door closed softly, and the three CID SUVs, just as silently as they had arrived, drove away, leaving behind the two empty police cruisers, a visible monument to the cost of prejudice. The story had been witnessed, documented, and the public was now ready to take over the narrative. Later that afternoon, the quiet of Shonda's living room offered a stark contrast to the morning's chaos. She sat on her couch, her uniform jacket neatly hung up, sipping a glass of water, watching the local news coverage that had already saturated the airwaves. The mayor of Fayetteville, a middle-aged woman named Reynolds, appeared on screen at a hastily arranged press conference outside City Hall. She looked grim, her expression conveying the severe embarrassment and professional consequences the city faced. The mayor's voice was firm, leaving no room for doubt about the city's decision. The mayor of Fayetteville appears on screen looking grim and announces, "I want to personally apologize to Lieutenant Shonda Hayes. Officers Jenkins and Shaw have been terminated, not suspended, effective immediately." A 15-minute mistake doesn't just cost a career. In the age of social media, it costs a city its reputation. By late afternoon, the arrest of Lieutenant Shonda Hayes had become more than just a local incident. It was a national scandal. The video clips, initially captured by the phones of the outraged bystanders like Mr. Walter at Mama Sue's Diner, had rapidly saturated every corner of the digital landscape. The clear, steady footage captured by Mr. Walter, showing the full escalation, Jenkins's racist taunts, Shonda's dignified silence, and the eventual dramatic arrival of Major General Mitchell, provided undeniable evidence. Within hours, the clips were trending on TikTok, Facebook, and X, formerly Twitter, generating millions of views. The hashtag "While She Respect the Uniform" surged to the top, shared fiercely by active military personnel, veterans associations, and civil rights groups. This widespread digital outrage highlighted the unique accountability imposed by modern technology, demanding swift and transparent justice from the Fayetteville City Hall. The story was quickly picked up by major network affiliates and cable news channels. Talk show hosts across the political spectrum debated the shocking visibility of racial profiling and stolen valor accusations against an active-duty black female officer. Veterans called in, expressing profound disgust at the disrespect shown to the uniform, validating the strong military values held by the audience over 60. The sheer volume of public condemnation, fueled by the viral videos, meant that the mayor's office could not simply issue a quiet statement. A full public response was mandatory. The pressure was intense, focusing global attention on a small North Carolina town. Reporters began descending upon the quiet corner where Mama Sue's Diner stood, interviewing tearful patrons and demanding comments from the visibly exhausted Mama Sue herself. The quiet calm that Shonda had enjoyed in her living room was now surrounded by a massive, unavoidable media storm, confirming that the consequences of Officer Jenkins' arrogance were far-reaching and systemic. The public was demanding not just punishment, but change. The mayor of Fayetteville, Mayor Reynolds, quickly scheduled a press conference outside City Hall, recognizing that only an official, unequivocal statement could begin to staunch the bleeding to the city's reputation. She stepped up to the podium, her face grave, flanked by silent city council members and the chief of police. Her tone was firm, professional, and entirely focused on damage control and accountability. Shonda watched the live broadcast from her couch, calmly taking notes on the mayor's every word, recognizing the strategic weight of the administration's public statement. "What happened on Maple Street this morning was unacceptable," Mayor Reynolds began, her voice carrying the necessary conviction. She delivered the city's formal public apology, condemning the actions of the two officers in the strongest possible terms, acknowledging the trauma and injustice inflicted upon Lieutenant Shonda Hayes. She then moved swiftly to the consequences, confirming the earlier news report and leaving no room for doubt. Officers Kyle Jenkins and Ben Shaw have been terminated, not suspended, not transferred, but fired, effective immediately. Their conduct violated the core trust between the police department and the community they are sworn to serve. The finality of the announcement brought a clear sense of public relief, affirming that the high standards of justice the military community expected had been met by the civilian authorities. Mayor Reynolds then shifted her focus from punishment to reform, addressing the systemic issue of bias. She announced the immediate creation of a mandatory cultural sensitivity and anti-profiling training program for all officers, from the highest ranks down to the newest recruits. This was the moment the city officially recognized the structural failure that had allowed Jenkins' prejudice to flourish. The mayor concluded by extending a formal and highly publicized invitation. She asked Lieutenant Hayes to be the city's first keynote speaker and consultant for this new training program, recognizing Shonda's disciplined composure as a powerful example of the honor their officers should strive to emulate. This offer, placing Shonda in a position of authority over the police department, was the ultimate vindication of her character. Shonda watched the screen as the press conference concluded, the news anchors now praising the city's swift action and the lieutenant's remarkable self-control. A deep sense of peace washed over her, a calm that had nothing to do with revenge or satisfaction over Jenkins' downfall. She realized the mayor's offer was more valuable than any punitive civil lawsuit. While financial compensation was an option, as General Mitchell had noted, the opportunity to address the very source of the injustice, to train those who wore the badge, to see humanity before color or rank, was the more profound victory, fully embracing the theme of compassion and forgiveness over simple retribution. She recognized that true justice was the opportunity to correct the system, ensuring that no other soldier, no other black person would face such humiliating profiling again. The system, though flawed and requiring pressure, had demonstrated its ability to self-correct. She took a slow, deep breath, finally accepting the end of this chapter. She knew her decision would surprise some, particularly those expecting a massive civil suit, but she understood her mission extended beyond her personal grievance. Her superior officer, General Mitchell, had only required honor. Shonda decided to offer education. She reached for her phone, now fully charged and ringing almost constantly with messages of support, and bypassed all the well-meaning texts. She found General Mitchell's direct line and dialed the number she knew by heart. The general answered immediately. Shonda's voice was professional, clear, and firm, echoing the disciplined report she had given on the sidewalk that morning. She thanked him formally for his decisive intervention and then delivered her decision regarding the city's public offer. She confirmed that she would not be pursuing any further legal action against the city or the former officers, choosing to focus on the future rather than the past. Shonda calls General Mitchell and confirms her next major assignment. "Sir, I accept the city's invitation. I think I have a lesson they need to hear." She wasn't there to lecture them on policy. She was there to teach them about humanity and the difference between power and respect. Weeks after the incident at Mama Sue's Diner, Lieutenant Shonda Hayes stepped onto the stage of the Fayetteville Police Training Academy auditorium. The sterile, brightly lit room was filled with young, nervous police cadets and seasoned veteran trainers, all acutely aware of the national spotlight currently fixed on their department. Shonda chose to deliver her talk wearing only her crisp army blouse and trousers, having left her jacket, adorned with her ribbons and rank insignia, on a chair backstage. This subtle act of removing the physical symbols of her highest authority allowed her to speak to them not just as a commissioned officer, but as a person, a choice that immediately commanded a different kind of respect. She saw the faces of the cadets, many of them young and idealistic, but others already hardened by a cynicism that often plagues law enforcement. Near the back of the room, sitting alone, was Officer Ben Shaw, the nervous partner who had failed to intervene, but had managed a whispered apology. He was there not as an officer, but as a former employee utilizing mandatory severance resources, fulfilling a required attendance for reflection. His presence was a quiet subplot of redemption waiting to happen, a testament to Shonda's decision to focus on education rather than maximum legal retribution. Shonda began her speech not by recounting the injustice she had faced, but by sharing her personal journey, the sheer effort and pride it took for her, a black woman from North Carolina, to earn the lieutenant bars on her shoulders. She spoke of the importance of the uniform, any uniform, whether it was the Army's green or the police department's blue, as a symbol of service and sacrifice to the community. She gently recalled the details of that November morning, not with anger or bitterness, but with the measured clarity of someone giving a performance review on a critical operational failure. She described the cold snap of the handcuffs and the pain in her wrists, contrasting the physical pain with the deeper, corrosive pain of being judged not by her service record, but by the color of her skin. She emphasized her commitment to discipline, highlighting that her refusal to fight back or resort to legal threats was not born of weakness, but of the strength of her conviction in the higher principles of the law, principles that Jenkins had abandoned in his moment of unchecked power. She told them that true authority was earned through the calm execution of justice, not the arrogant display of force. Her story, delivered without a script and with complete emotional honesty, resonated deeply with the audience, establishing her moral authority over them long before she delivered her main message. Shonda then moved to the core of her lecture, the essential difference between power and respect. She spoke eloquently about how a badge or a gun grants one power, but only respect could grant legitimacy and trust, especially in a community as sensitive and diverse as Fayetteville, which was home to thousands of soldiers and veterans. She urged the young cadets to think beyond the immediate threat and to question the instincts that Officer Jenkins had blindly followed. She made it clear that prejudice disguised as instinct was the greatest enemy of the badge, capable of destroying not only careers, but also the critical bond between law enforcement and the public. Your duty is not to be right. Your duty is to be just, Shonda stated, her voice filling the large auditorium. She then delivered her central thesis, the critical lessons she had come to share. When you see a black person in a uniform or simply walking down the street, don't let instinct born of fear or prejudice take over. Power only works when it serves respect. Ask before you act. She recounted the moment Jenkins refused to check her ID, the simplest step that would have prevented the entire catastrophe. This act of negligence, born of bias, was what led to his termination, not merely the anger of a high-ranking general. She reminded them that the authority to carry a weapon and detain a citizen was a sacred trust, one that required exhaustive due diligence and a complete lack of personal bias. The silence in the room was absolute. Even the veteran trainers listened with a renewed seriousness. Shonda's message extended beyond the current room, resonating with the older veterans and the wider audience who valued integrity and duty. She emphasized that the greatest act of courage they would ever perform was the courage to question their own assumptions. She painted a picture of mutual respect, where the military and the police, both servants of the public, worked in unity, recognizing each other's sacrifice rather than viewing each other with suspicion. This plea for unity and respect was her greatest offering to the city, replacing the anger and division caused by Jenkins' racism with a foundation for future reconciliation. Her focus remained purely on education and forward progress, demonstrating the profound moral weight of her decision to forego the lucrative civil lawsuit. Finally, Shonda addressed the issue of the two officers who had so profoundly wronged her. She did not name them, but the entire room understood. This was the ultimate test of her character and the full expression of the theme of compassion. She looked directly toward the back rows where Ben Shaw sat, his shoulders slumped in quiet contemplation. She stated that while the consequences for their actions were necessary and just, she harbored no personal hatred or desire for further ruin. She expressed hope that their forced time off would not be spent in bitterness, but in reflection, leading to genuine personal and professional growth. This was a challenging act of forgiveness, offering a path toward redemption that neither Jenkins nor Shaw truly deserved, but which Shonda offered freely as a testament to her faith in the possibility of change. The camera briefly focused on Officer Shaw, who slowly raised his head, his eyes moist, nodding slightly, a small, silent sign that the message of humanity had finally penetrated his professional silence. The atmosphere in the auditorium, which had been tense and professional, dissolved into a wave of genuine emotion. The young cadets, seeing not a victim or a prosecutor, but a teacher and a leader, rose in a wave of slow, respectful applause. The veteran trainers joined in, acknowledging the profound honor of her lesson. Shonda's dignity had won the ultimate quiet battle, replacing the viral noise with a lasting message of honor and grace. She walked off the stage, her task complete. That evening, Shonda sat on the porch of her home, far from the chaos of the city, enjoying the cool Carolina air. She sat in a rocking chair, drinking a glass of sweet tea, a comforting Southern ritual. In the distance, the faint, clear sound of the evening flag retreat at Fort Bragg drifted through the quiet neighborhood air, a beautiful, solemn ceremony honoring the flag and the end of the duty day. She watched the shadows lengthen and reflected on the day she was cuffed and the ultimate price paid for prejudice. She didn't seek revenge. She gained something more powerful and enduring. She didn't seek revenge. She gained something more powerful. The world heard her story, reminding everyone that respect isn't a favor. It is a human right that must be earned, not questioned. Lieutenant Shonda Hayes' quiet victory at Mama Sue's Diner was a powerful reminder that true authority lies not in the badge, but in the integrity of the soul. In an age where judgment is often passed in a moment, she demonstrated the enduring strength of dignity over rage and the profound meaning of grace under pressure. Her choice to trade the bitterness of retribution for the high honor of education ultimately transformed a shameful act of prejudice into a lesson for a whole generation. The story of that cold steel and that single powerful phone call assures us that justice, rooted in respect and compassion, will always triumph over blind arrogance. reminding us all that we should never judge the honor of a person by the uniform they wear or the color of their skin.